Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
We're live at Hampden-Sydney College.
Thanks for coming out on a Sunday night. I'm James, he's Ant. Feel free to say or ask anything you want. Don't hold back. If you need something from us, just let us know.
We went out for dinner, and the service was non-existent.
It was kind of atrocious, yeah.
And then we got here.
He didn't get dinner.
We get here, finally, of course, 20 minutes late and all of that, and the doors are locked, we can't get in. So we figure that there's no way we can be the worst thing that happens tonight.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, we're going to suck at something, but
not that bad.
Not that bad.
We have a podcast, Words and Numbers.
You might know this already, given the microphones.
Once in a while, we do a live episode, in front of a live audience. So this is going to be one of those episodes. Afterwards, we're happy to hang out, as James said, as long as you want, doing Q&A. And if the Q&A is particularly good, we'd use that as a bonus episode.
We've heard that you guys have to do like a podcast episode as a final project this year. So if you want to know anything about how that works, soup to nuts, we'd be happy to help.
Thank you for being here. We're just going to start off as we typically do our podcast episode.
Ant, in front of all these nice people, I can't believe I'm going to disappoint this many people at the same moment. In front of all these people, what's new and exciting?
We ran across, actually a friend gave to me.
I gave to you.
James gave to me a link to a GoFundMe page for Donald Trump. Apparently his supporters have put together this page to help raise money. He owes on one lawsuit $355 million, on another one about $40 million. I think there's one that's $5 million.
Another one that's 93.
Yeah, it added up, and he's around, what is that? He's approaching $500 million that he owes, but certainly over $450 million. This GoFundMe page is attempting to raise for one of those $355 million, and I've been tracking it this evening. Thus far, it's been up for 2 days. It's raised over $300,000. But as of this evening, it seems to be increasing by about $7,000 an hour. Now, what's interesting about this is Trump owes $450 million at, let's say, conservatively 7% interest. The interest is racking up on that sum to the tune of about $80,000 an hour. $80,000 an hour, and he's raising $7,000 an hour. So this GoFundMe campaign is actually losing money as we speak. So if you're thinking about donating, don't bother, because it can't even keep up with the interest, let alone come close to paying off what he owes. I did the math. There were something like 6,700 people have donated. So that comes out to be like over $40 per person.
They're doing okay, and I think the interesting part is going to be to see if they can keep up that level of giving.
If they can keep up not keeping up with interest.
Well, I mean, look, everybody's got this problem, right? And it's no surprise that he does too. The shocking thing for me is that they've raised as much as they have.
Right, yeah.
Because I'm on record as saying I have never, nor will I ever give money to a politician for anything. But a lot of other people look at that very differently. I'm wondering if they're going to be able to keep up the interest in this at all. The numbers are so fantastic, but his followers are so thoroughly committed that it's an interesting thing to sit back and watch. And, this episode is a weird one. Everybody knows that we cover 3 things before we get to the main episode. And this week, all 3 easily could have been and likely should have been the foolishness of the week. So I'm trying to figure out which one to go with next. And in the interest of party parity, I'll throw the Democrats under the bus next, and we'll get back to Donald Trump in a bit. Rashida Tlaib from Michigan is encouraging people to vote for someone other than Joe Biden in the Democratic primary.
A Democrat advising people to not vote for Biden.
That is correct. She's been kind of hostile, and there's all kinds of Middle Eastern political problems swimming just below the surface here. And I think she might be the first person with national standing that has said, don't vote for our nominee. There are a number of people whispering in his ear saying, Joe, it's time to hang it up. But of course, part of the problem when you're not thinking clearly and the dementia sets in is that you become quite convinced that you are thinking very clearly and you have no issue with dementia whatsoever. And anybody who's dealt with a loved one with Alzheimer's disease knows this. You just know how this is going to go. And I think it's very clear that Joe Biden has Alzheimer's disease, and I think it's equally clear that Donald Trump is in the early stages of it too. So I think we've got two nominees heading into a race for the presidency who are compromised mentally. Rashida Tlaib, not the voice of reason, right? She is not the person I would have expected to be saying, okay, let's maybe rethink this one. But it's the first chink in the armor, and it is interesting to see.
And that's the thing that baffles me. Given the numbers, the majority of Americans, or at least the plurality of Americans, don't want either one of these guys. And here we are doing the second round of elections with both these guys. It seems to me if one of the parties wanted to cinch up the election, all they have to do is pick somebody else. Either one of them. It doesn't matter. It seems Americans will take none of the above over either of these guys.
It is interesting how this is all playing out. And I think it's very clear that the majority of Americans literally do not want the choices they're about to get. But this is baked into the system we have. This is just how it's going to work. Our problem is that we've got too much democracy. It's not that we don't have enough, it's that we have too much. It's time to go back to smoke-filled rooms because we got better candidates when that's how they were chosen. And I know that doesn't sound right in the progressive era that we're still living in. People have a knee-jerk reaction that if there's a problem, we have to make things more democratic. But I would ask, why on earth would you think that? Isn't that maybe the wrong answer? Isn't it noticeable?
The question is this. Before you say we need more democracy, you have to ask the question, what's the quality of the voter? And, I'm not suggesting that the voters are stupid, but I am suggesting that largely they're unengaged. To the point that you'll get intelligent people saying things like, and we're going to talk about this in the main episode, we should raise the minimum wage because this will help people. Clearly not the case. Now, the average person who isn't educated in economics, I can see how they would say that. Someone who is educated in economics understands the nuances and what actually happens. But here's the thing. When we say we should have more democracy, we're saying everybody should have an equal vote. Not just everybody should have an equal vote, but there should be more of the people having these equal votes.
Look, even in my discipline, political science, right, when you start thinking about how people view politics, I mean, how many times lately have you heard, well, let's just have term limits? People say this all the time. It's unconstitutional. The Supreme Court ruled years ago, decades ago, that you can't do it. And people aren't paying any attention. So, taking those same people seriously as some sort of font of wisdom in the public space, it's laughable.
Well,
look, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be the basis somehow of all political authority. Of course they should be. But just how far that should extend, how active a role they should play, those are the open questions.
And in the people's defense, the politicians themselves say this. And I would imagine there are some politicians who actually don't understand that there are certain things that are unconstitutional. But largely, I would imagine the politicians say what they expect their voters to hear. You and I moderated the South Carolina Libertarian debates, and at least one of the candidates, and these are serious people, at least one of the candidates said, part of my platform is I'm going to institute term limits. First off, that's not even within the power of the president. Second, it's not even within the power of Congress. It requires a constitutional amendment. And this seemed to be news to the candidate.
You would think that people who want political authority might brush up on this sort of thing ahead of time.
Yeah, but if the candidates themselves don't understand it, I kind of give the voters a pass. And look, my problem is they shouldn't be voting.
And I'm not even going to go that far. I give the voters a pass too, because people shouldn't be required to care about much of anything. If they don't give a damn, if what they really want to do is stay home and watch a basketball game on the weekends, hey, go with God. Go watch basketball. Right, that's fine. Does that mean you're not qualified to have an opinion about how your life should be run? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that we have to, I think, tiptoe around how deeply we should expect people to educate themselves. And I expect that to happen almost not at all. But I'm okay with it. Now, the answer is not going to be more democracy over and over and over in some kind of mantra. We hear it all the time. And that's just stupid. You're asking for trouble. And if that means that the primary system, as we've come to expect it, ceases to exist in the next election cycle, thank God in heaven. Look at the knuckleheads that we end up with on both sides of the aisle. When's the last candidate, not winner, but candidate, you can remember who you thought, I am proud that that person might have the office of president?
Now, people are going to say in response, okay, fine, James, you're saying we should have less democracy, but what's the alternative?
Look, if the political parties are going to occupy that space that spit out candidates for us, well, then let them do that. Let the party, as a private organization, figure out who they want. Now, will that always yield great outcomes? No, of course it won't, but it'll yield better outcomes than the nonsense we're dealing with.
Following that thought, you say, fine, we'll let democracy pick from amongst think of them as pre-screened candidates. You get people in the parties who know what they're doing. They put forth people that they believe are adequate, and then you have the general populace pick from amongst those options.
Generally how we did things for over 100 years.
Yep.
It worked pretty well back when. I don't see why we shouldn't at least consider it right now. Anyway, that gets us to the official foolishness of the week. And for people who listen, you're going to wonder why Clark's not with us today, right? Clark Neely, our good friend who thinks about constitutional issues. Donald Trump said, I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, that what he really wants to do with law enforcement in the United States is indemnify every law officer in the country.
Okay, so
tell the people what indemnify means first.
To indemnify means they cannot be held responsible. You can't sue them if a police officer does something to you. You can't sue him.
Which we generally already have.
Generally, you already have it. Now, if he's talking about full indemnity, what does he mean from criminal charges as well as
that's
civil?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And think about that. We've got what we call qualified immunity, right? And everybody acting under color of authority. They can do near anything they want, knowing in their heart that they will never be held accountable for it. The most accountable they will be is maybe, and I mean maybe, being disciplined at work. Losing their job is the ultimate price to pay.
Now, there are exceptions, like that officer, where was that, Minnesota, Michigan?
In the chokehold.
But that came about because of the tremendous amount of publicity that was going on.
And that is the exception, not the rule. Why a candidate for the presidency would want to pile on to this form of immunity is somewhat baffling.
This is an example.
Right?
The president doesn't have the authority to grant immunity like that.
Yeah, one wonders how he would approach this. How many things Donald Trump said he was going to do before he became president last time did he actually do? The answer, I think, was almost none. This is going to fall into that category. He did say that he was going to balance the budget and pay off the debt in 8 years.
I'm going to give the usual disclaimer here. We're talking about President Trump, but pretty much everything we're saying here applies to the other guy as well. In fact, not just the other guy, but pretty much anybody who runs anymore. There's this habit of presidents and candidates claiming that they're going to do all manner of things that A, are economically impossible and or B, are constitutionally not allowed.
And let's stop there for just a second, because economically impossible is an interesting phrase. You and I have been beating the debt drum for 20 years. And I think the very first things we ever wrote were about the debt and how it was going to come back to haunt us, and we've got a real big problem here. Okay, Donald Trump says he's going to pay off the debt in 8 years. We call bullshit on it pretty quickly. But what could he have managed in 8 years, even if he did want to?
There's not a tremendous amount. We say things like, well, this president, he can create jobs or what have you. And the fact is, presidents don't create jobs. Now, I think presidents do have the ability, and certainly Congress has the ability, to prevent entrepreneurs and workers from creating jobs. That's who actually creates jobs. But to say that a president can create jobs or to make the claim that this is what I'm going to do if you elect me is just complete nonsense.
I'm not sure that he could have even come close to balancing the budget, which is the first step towards paying anything off, right? The first thing you have to do is stop spending more money than you're taking in.
Yeah, and there, again, you have to think about how these things work. Presidents don't decide whether government's going to spend money. Congress decides that.
Well, in fairness, he could say, I'm not going to sign that.
He can, but what's going to happen? Congress is going to pass some kind of continuing resolution. The government's not going to shut down. Or if it does shut down, it's very quickly going to come back up again. In the end, there's not much a president can do at all, save for lead people to say, look, this is important. We should do something. You should be concerned about it. Call up your congressman. They should be concerned about it. Can use the bully pulpit. That's about the only thing he's got.
And that's really what you see. And we end up with a whole lot of nothing. So do politicians keep their promises? Well, of course they don't. They're politicians. What's left? Not much. So the real question is, why do people keep falling for it?
Election after election. Yeah.
And let's actually talk about it. Let's get into the substance of a thing. And this is the danger of recording something live in front of an audience. I can't remember who the idiot in California is. Anybody remember who the idiot is who proposed a $50 an hour minimum wage last week? Everybody's laughing and giggling, but nobody's...
This was a U.S. senator, not a state senator.
United States, a candidate for the U.S. Senate has announced her plan that what we really need is a $50 an hour minimum wage. And to make that clear, there's 2,040 hours in a work year, so you're looking at a minimum wage of over $100,000 a year.
$104,000. That's the proposed minimum wage.
Barbara Lee. Say again? Barbara Lee, that's correct. That's the one. So we've got candidate Lee saying, well, what we really need to do is boost everybody to 100,000 and then some. So Ant and I do this from time to time, and we don't want you to feel bad about it. We want you to give an honest answer to the question we're going to ask.
How many of you,
what
percentage do you think of American workers are earning the minimum wage? Let's stop at 50%. Who says 50% of American workers earn the minimum wage? I've got no hands.
No hands.
40%. I've got one hand. 30% of Americans earn the minimum wage. Okay, now we got...
It's always 30. Yeah. Every time we do this,
I'm
the hands go up at 30.
Maybe half the room?
It looks like just about half the room is landed at 30%. 20? Can I get 20? It's like a reverse auction.
Right. And this is like the rest of the room's coming up now. Anybody say less than 10? I've got 1, 2, 3. Or now the professor's hands go up.
There are 3 economists in the room.
3 economists and looks like 5 or 6 students. The correct answer? 1% of Americans earn the minimum wage.
It's probably a little worse than that because you have to figure out how to categorize people who make healthy tips, right? Because they're making less than minimum wage, but you know good well that they're making way more than minimum wage. So what we're looking at here is a group of people that comprise clearly less than 1% of the population. And we've got a politician in California saying, am I going too far when I say tank the economy?
Let's stop and look at her number for a minute. So she's saying the minimum wage should be $50 an hour, which is $104,000 a year for a full-time worker. Do you know what the average worker makes an hour? And I'm going to include...
Is it average or is it median?
Maybe it's the median.
I think it's the median.
Median worker, so the guy in the middle. And here I'm including not just hourly workers, but salaried workers, and divide by the number of hours, so you get, a number.
Everybody who's working.
Everybody. What's the number in the middle? Any guesses?
Say again? Let's stick with an hourly wage.
Per hour.
So that would be about $8 an hour, $9 an hour. 10, 8. So we're
now, but look at something
here.
Interesting here. This is what we have a name for this. This is called the observation bias. You're all college students. When I ask you a question, you answer necessarily from your perspective, from your experience. And your perspective, your experience are people who are earning what you're saying here.
And I'm guessing the minimum wage in Virginia is under $10 an hour.
I don't know what it is. No.
Where I live, it's 14.
But the answer is around $32 an hour.
So at 10, you're way off.
So I got nodding from professors in the back, which I'm very happy about because I'm doing this from memory. Yeah, about $32 an hour. Now, here's the thing. How many Americans earn already $104,000 or more? It turns out the answer is, and I'm not talking about households here, because households, you have multiple wage earners, right? I'm talking about individual Americans. How many are earning $104,000 or more a year? And the answer is 17%. She is proposing to impose a wage control that's going to hit 83% of the population. Most of you gentlemen are economics majors, I would presume. What happens when you raise a minimum wage? Yes. Inflation. Now, that's an interesting answer Because what we imagine is we're going to raise the minimum wage. This is what this woman whose name I've even forgotten now, Lee,
we forget quickly,
thinks. Your thought is we raise this wage and now everybody's earning more money. What happens? Well, if you're going to force the employer to pay its workers more money, that money's got to come from somewhere. And one place it can come from is from the employer just charging his customers more. So all of a sudden prices start going up as well.
Well, and with a radical change, look, we can quibble about what happens when you raise it by a quarter.
Right.
But when you raise the minimum wage to $100,000 a year,
right,
you're going to monkey
Imagine
around with,
what a hamburger is going to cost at McDonald's if everybody behind the counter is earning $104,000 a year, right? You're going to be paying $75 for.
And it's not just that, right? Because think about what happens to expensive, specialized labor, people who work their entire lives to become something that we really need. And how do we know we really need it? We pay them a lot of money. And think petroleum engineer, right? Think people like this. What happens when they look up and see the janitor at their company making $100,000 a year?
Now, some of them are going to say, but I love petroleum engineering. That's what I want to do. Fine, go with God, right? But a lot of people...
I'm going to become a janitor.
I mean, how many of you are something difficult, like math majors or finance majors? I mean, econ majors, we all know is difficult, right? Right. So you're going through these 4 years studying this very difficult thing so that you can earn a lot of money. What happens if all of a sudden you can get $104,000 for making pizzas or flipping burgers? I mean, heck with that. A lot of you are going to say, I'm going to just go for an easy life. I'm going to make the money by doing something simple.
And look, if I could have the purchasing power right now of over $100,000 doing something that I find incredibly easy, so easy I could do it with my eyes closed, you can bet that that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm going to dedicate my life to other things that I find interesting that don't pay a whole lot. Right. Things that I would love to do right now, but that the market instructs me with great vigor that I am not to do.
So we have this problem that if indeed we did push the wage up like she is suggesting, it's not just going to be the 83% of us who are earning less than $104,000. Everybody who's earning over $104,000 is going to turn around and say, you're going to have to jack my wage up as well. Because why should I keep busting my butt doing this difficult thing if I'm going to make as much as everybody else? Now, one of the things that can happen is that these wages get pushed off to customers in the form of higher prices. Another thing that can happen, and this is what I'm sure the candidate has in mind, is that the money gets paid out of the company's profits. And you all hear about how many billions of dollars, ExxonMobil makes, and the banks and the insurance companies and all this. Let me ask you, we'll do it by show of hands again. Here's my question. What is the profit margin of the average American company? American companies, of course, cross the board. Some make a lot, some make less, whatever it is. I'm talking about profit margin. 50%?
Start at 50.
Anybody say 50%? Okay.
No takers at 50.
I'm going to go down, 40%.
No takers at
30. I've got one hand on 30%.
We usually start getting takers at about 30. People seem to think that the correct answer is in this neighborhood.
Average profit margin, right? So think, all the companies, McDonald's, it's millions of dollars, and Walmart, blah, blah.
Apple.
Yeah, Apple, 20%.
20. Couple more,
okay.
not many. 10?
10?
And here's where the hands start.
Yeah. So you've got good econ teachers, I can tell. The correct answer is 6. The average American company makes 6. And while we're here, let's ask about Walmart. Do you know what Walmart's profit margin is?
Evil Walmart.
Come on. 50% Walmart? 40, 30, 20? 1. Walmart's profit margin is about 1%, 2% in a good year. Grocery stores, which we all think of because you see, this is where you're spending your money for food that you absolutely
dump a lot
need.
of your money at a grocery store.
Grocery store, typically their profit margin's 1%.
Razor thin. With Walmart, it's a volume business. And they decided early on, Sam Walton decided early on, that it was better to sell 1 million things and make a penny than to sell 100 things and make $1. And well, yeah, it is better if you can scale up. And then the question becomes, is Walmart providing a service to the communities it exists in, or is it somehow cannibalizing those communities? These are the arguments that follow. Personally, I like the option of being able to buy things at lower prices. I don't particularly value having small mom and pop companies in local communities. Other people see that very differently, and I get it. A matter of, do you believe that the mom and pop organizations should exist so much that you actually go there and spend your own money in them? And that's always the open question, right? Because we get a lot of pontificating, people saying that it's better and preferable, and then when nobody's looking, they're shopping just like the rest of us, because everybody is on a limited budget, right? It's just the nature of human life.
Go back to James talking about volume for a moment. We talk about the oil companies and how much they make. ExxonMobil, I should have looked up the number before I came in, but their profit last year was multi-billions of dollars.
Yeah, but we, a long time ago, sat down with reams of data and tried to figure out how much profit ExxonMobil, or insert oil company name here, makes on a gallon of gas.
Let me go there in a moment. But if you think about the profit from a dollar perspective, yes, indeed, it's billions of dollars of profit. But stop and ask yourself, what did it cost to create ExxonMobil? Right? Because it didn't just fall out of the sky. You've got to convince investors to put up their money so that we can build this company. And what do they want in return? They want a return on their investment. So that billions of dollars that Exxon made is about 20% of what it cost to create Exxon in the first place. 20% return. Now, 20% is great, but that's in an industry where profits are very volatile. They're up, they're down, right? So part of the high return that they're getting, 20%, is going to pay for that risk. But here's the important thing. When you think about company profits, never think about the dollars because they're flashy. You can see the billions of them. Ask about the return on the company, how much was invested. Now, James is referring to something we wrote a while back. We were asking the question, where does your dollar go when you buy a gallon of gas? 5 cents of what you pay is going to the oil company profit.
And I think it was 3 to 5.
Taxes? We were both in Pennsylvania at the time.
That's
Pennsylvania
right.
has the highest state tax of all the states. But in Pennsylvania, 60 cents was going to taxes, either federal or state
and
at the time.
I think the federal at the time was 33 or 35.
18, I don't know what
something
it was.
Like this.
But here's the point. You look at how much you're paying for a gallon of gas, you get mad. Don't get mad at the oil companies. They're taking a nickel. It's the government, various levels, that are taking the lion's share of the
right.
Of the
And think about this when you hear about those greedy oil companies, because it's demonstrably true that the government is greedier than the oil companies when it comes to the gasoline that you're paying for.
By more than a factor of 10.
10.
Now, let me go back to where we were, because I threw out this question of, all right, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $104,000, and what can happen? This gentleman said, well, we can pass some of that on to consumers in the form of higher prices, and I've made the argument that you really can't pass it on to the investors in the form of lower returns, because the returns are pretty small to begin with. You're talking 6% on average. But something's got to give. What gives? If you're an employer and the government has said to you, you must pay all of your workers $104,000, and you can't pass that on to your consumers because consumers aren't going to pay it, and you can't take it out of the profits that would go to the investors because there just isn't that much money there, what's the last thing you can do? Yeah, start to cut salaries, make the workers pay for it.
And the only way you can cut salary is by cutting workers, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a new floor. You have to pay them $104,000 now. So your choice isn't whether you will pay them that, it's whether you will employ them at all.
Yes.
And the answer is going to be no to anyone who doesn't add that much to your bottom line. Because you have to be worth at least what you cost, or you will find yourself unemployed.
And this is an interesting thing that people push back on us when we say, look, the employer isn't going to employ you if the value you create isn't worth what he has to pay you. And people push back on that and say, well, no, the employer should feel an obligation to the community and all this stuff. And I say, stop. We all do this. Think about yourself. How many people do you employ to clean your dorm room? I'm sure you've got a common room in the dorm that's probably messy at all. How many people do you hire to do this? And I'm not counting the people that the college brings in. I mean, you hire somebody. Or think about, if college is problematic, think about your home life. How many people do you hire to come and do your dishes, to make your bed, to mow your lawn? Once in a while, you get a family who'll hire somebody to mow the lawn, but Most people say, oh, it's ridiculous. I wouldn't pay somebody to come and do the dishes or make my bed. I can do that myself.
For less.
Yes.
Bingo.
You just perform the same calculation we're telling you the businesses perform. They look at the job and they say, is it worth it to hire somebody to do this? And if the answer is no, they don't hire somebody to do it.
And remember, businesses exist to make a profit. That's what they're for. Anything that disallows that isn't going to work out. You're going to have to do something else. When people say, well, a business should go out of business if they can't afford to pay the minimum wage. Well, okay, how high does that wage have to be before we all admit it's asinine? $100,000 a year as a minimum wage is asinine.
What it immediately does is to jeopardize the jobs of 83% of Americans.
Badly. That a candidate for the United States Senate can't figure that out is baffling.
Well, and let me bring this back around to where we started when we talked about democracy and the problems. I don't know the woman. Maybe she actually does believe that $50 minimum wage is a good idea. But I could argue, even if she knew that it was a bad idea and she understood everything we're saying here today, she has an incentive to campaign on that anyway. You could imagine a situation in which a politician actually understands everything we've talked about here. I have found it generally a bad idea to ascribe stupidity to politicians. Generally, they're pretty smart people. Let's suppose the person understands everything we've talked about here. They know that this proposal would cause unemployment to 83% of us, whatever it is. The person still has an incentive to campaign on this position. This person still has an incentive to pretend to you that it's a good idea. Why? It's actually our fault, because we, the voters, aren't informed enough to understand that that's a bad idea. And so what happens if you present a bunch of uninformed voters to candidates? What's going to happen? If he tells you the truth about the minimum wage, you're not going to elect him. If I lie, you will elect me. I have an incentive to lie. And furthermore, now he has an incentive to lie, because the only way he can compete against me is by lying. And whose fault is that ultimately? It's really not ours. Because if we say, look, we'll tell you the truth, you'll get rid of us and bring in somebody else who will lie to you. The problem is you.
And here's what's going to happen, and I know I'm right. $104,000 a year, that's the minimum wage she's out there campaigning for. Next time around, it's going to be $156,000.
Yeah, because now we've got an arms race going on.
That's right.
He says he'll give you $50 an hour if you elect him. I'll give you $75.
And so it goes on and on and on. And that's the difference between politics and economics. Politicians don't have to care about any of the hard and fast rules of economics. All they have to do is convince you not to care either.
And you have an incentive not to care. Your incentive comes in part from the fact that you don't pay the bill. If I get elected and this ends up costing the country a tremendous amount, you, the voter, probably won't pay that bill. Who probably will pay the bill are your children and grandchildren.
That's right.
Because my asinine policy just added a couple of zeros to the national debt, the interest on which your kids and their kids are going to have to pay.
Before you pretend to care, what was your reaction when you found out you were going to get a check in the mail during the COVID period?
I have to admit, and I'm an economist, I was very happy about my check.
I needed that check. On that unfortunate note, we take our leave of you this week.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.